saying so I have my oldest kid is sophomore at Rice in mechanical engineering. My middle child is at Pitzer College in California, studying either international relations or linguistics. We don't know yet. She's a big language person. And then my third kid is sophomore in high school, homeschooled, obviously, and mostly interested in music. So I've got a STEM kid, a humanities kid, and then a music kid who's not academic. So nothing I learned from anyone transferred to any other. So I had to kind of relearn everything from the process. So what I decided to do, I had so much trouble with my oldest child trying to figure out everything he needed to do that I talked to a million people, tried to pull all these things together to kind of figure out what the best way was to do, to make sure we had everything in order for applying to colleges and, you know, managing high school, so that when it came time to apply to colleges, I didn't try to have to make everything up from scratch. So this presentation, we'll talk, I mean, on other workshops we'll do other things, but on this presentation, it's about the practical stuff of what I found that I needed to do during high school to make life easier. So this presentation was basically written for students. So you'll see the language in it is, when it says you, it's usually written you as the teen student. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so what do I mean when I say adulting? So basically in this context, it is what do we need to do for high school and what do we need to do to be prepared for filling out college applications. And keep in mind that I'm not saying that every kid has to go to college, but if your kid is going to go to college, this is kind of the things that you can do to make things easier for you in the process. So the first thing that I want to cover is email. So email is, you know, it's your parents' generation, right? You know, most kids don't think about email too much because they're Snapchatting or Instagramming, and email is one of those things that seems like it kind of goes by the way of the dinosaur. But with email, you have a written record of correspondence. You don't have to try to look through texts that disappear. So email is essential, and that's the way colleges all communicate. So even if you think it's, as a student, you think it's a dinosaur and you don't want to have to deal with the out-of-date stuff that your parents dealt with, you still have to do it for colleges and for applications. So my suggestion, these are all my suggestions. You can take them and leave them, you can do what you want, but these are the things, through this whole presentation, these are the things that I found to be useful based on what other people have told me. So if you start, I would strongly suggest that every student have a separate email account for only high school and interviews and job interviews and things like that. So start a new email address that is something that has no connotations attached to it. Nothing political, nothing cutesy, nothing religious. So I always recommend people using something that's a version of their name and have it go to a permanent email account, not one that's tied to your cable provider, for instance. If you drop that cable, then your email account goes away. So use something like Gmail if you can. Or don't use a Hotmail address, for instance, but use something that is going to stay, that will transfer with you from provider to provider, and use an address name that will grow with you. So you don't want it to be, Cutie Pie Jones, because when you're 20, that's not going to be cool. So I strongly suggest using something with the student's name. Some people go as far as setting up an email address that includes their last name as their extension, like Camille@clarkfamily.com or something like that. But you don't have to go that far. Just really something very simple. You will only use this address for things related to college or job or college interviews or anything like that. And the reason for that is when you're when you're in the middle of the college application process, you're going to be bombarded by all of those schools that want you to apply because they want your application fees. So once you take the PSAT, if you check that box that says you want more information, you get on that list and you start getting stuff, and you start getting stuff in your email, and you will get dozens and dozens of emails from various colleges. You want to be able to sort out those emails from your email from ACC or your email from your family or something like that. So this address is only for use with college applications and the interviews that go with them, and then eventually probably job interviews or internship interviews. And I always tell kids, watch your tone when you're writing emails. When this has nothing to do with the address, but when you're writing emails, have a second set of eyes to look over it, because as students, my students that I work with, a lot of times they don't realize that a joke doesn't come across very well in email, or like a cute sarcastic little quip doesn't come across very well in email. There's no body language, there's no voice, nothing like that. So until you get really comfortable writing emails, run it by somebody that you trust. So when you're creating an email account, you just want to be very careful about what kind of image you're portraying, right? Okay, this is what I like to call hygiene. If you're a student and you're not used to using email, it's really easy to wait a week to look at your email, 2 weeks, look at your email, not looking at your email. But when you're in the college application process, it's imperative that you do it every day. My daughter applied to a school that didn't have, well, most schools will have an interview process where when you apply, you go through the website and you set up an interview at the time that you apply. Most of the ones that my kids applied to did it that way. Some do it different ways. Some will contact you after your application has been received, set up an interview. Some will have somebody contact you separately other than the application, and you have to watch your email. They'll do it all through email. Well, my daughter, love her to death, didn't check her email for 3 days and missed the window for one of her top schools that she wanted to apply to. She didn't get into that school. I don't know if it was because of the email, of missing the interview, or because she didn't respond. There's no way to know. It certainly didn't help. So follow up on your emails. Check your email every day, at least once a day, even if it means you have to set a timer on your phone to do it. Okay, I highly recommend that once you get to high school that every student have their own phone number. It is important because the schools will want to contact you directly, and you don't want to, as homeschoolers, you want the parent should stay as far out of the process as possible. So it looks better for the student to have their own number rather than the parent answering. And I will say that for just about everything, as a parent, you definitely want to be as much out of the process as possible. So if you can, it would be best to have your kid have their own number. And look into recording a voice message that is a professional sounding message. You don't want to have a message on your phone that is appropriate for your friends. Those usually are not as appropriate for the colleges. Now, you can change it back once you decide what school you want to go to, and your college isn't gonna contact you anymore. Okay, so phone hygiene, same way with email. Check your messages. Don't let them sit, because that interviewer might be calling you to say, oh, can we move that interview up a day because I have to go back to San Diego tomorrow instead of having your interview that day. It's really important to check your messages. Okay, social media. This is a big one. This is an interesting one. We know that our kids all live on many of our kids live on social media. I mean, my kids are constantly Snapchatting, Instagramming, whatever they do. And it's fine with, whatever your own agreement is with your kids is great. But if they use social media, you just need to be aware of some of the issues that can come up. So colleges do look at what you post. They will follow you. You want to make sure that you have a profile picture that is not something really horrible and I say specifically, don't use red Solo cups because they are an icon for drinking. So specifically red Solo cups. Don't post any pictures on your in your photo feed at all if you're a student that includes any red Solo cup anywhere, even if it has lemonade in it. Check your privacy settings. Make sure that what you're doing does not go out to the whole world. Just be very cognizant of what you're putting out there to the whole world. If you don't want your grandmother to see it, you certainly don't want colleges to see it. Remove, when I gave this presentation to the science team, when I said remove any photos that show you in a compromising situation or engaging in illegal activities, they all laughed, but you would be surprised at how many kids think it's funny. And you don't want to see, have a picture of yourself up there graffitiing some wall because that picture can get around. And I'm sure none of you would do that sort of thing, just saying. Be cognizant of your posts and comments. If you are highly political, fine, but just be aware that people are going to be reading, if you make it public, people are going to be reading those posts that you make. And if you call people names or something like that, you just want to be very aware of what you're saying. Also, if you are, pretty much everybody has things that colleges can see. So if you like pages that, I can come up with some, but pages that don't really mesh with what the college wants to see in its applicants, be careful of having those as your liked pages. Most people don't use Facebook anymore, but this kind of stuff is actually the same no matter what social media you use. So just using Facebook as an example, you can go onto your page and you can see that, oh, so-and-so liked, whatever, I don't know, Waterloo restaurant or whatever. But there are other places that you wouldn't want a college to know that you'd like. Just clean up your page. And follow the schools you're applying to. They know. They can tell that if you follow them. Now, it's not going to make a big deal. Following a school is not going to get you in, but it doesn't hurt to have as much connection with the school as possible. Okay, physical stuff. Physical stuff is hard to keep up with. You'd be surprised how often I've had to go dig through the stack at my house that is this tall of various Russian tests and engineering syllabi and papers that were written for a Shakespeare class, whatever it is. Get a box for each kid, and even if you just toss it in, you don't have to organize it, you don't have to file it. If you toss it in as you get it, it'll be in chronological order. So if you need something, you can just go back down through there. Don't wait to do what I do and just put it on the stack, and then the stack gets moved and then it gets all out of order. Just get a box for each kid with a lid. You open the lid, you throw it in. If you need it, you can have it all right there. You'd be surprised how many colleges will accept credit for classes that your kid took if they have a syllabus, they know what resources you used, and they have some example of the work that your kid did in that class. So most colleges will have a system where you can go and petition for credit for a particular class. And some schools have a system that's already set up with something like ACC. For instance, Rice, the school that I know about because my kid's there. So he took 4 semesters of calculus at ACC, and so when he went into engineering at Rice, he got credit for all 4 of those classes. So that means that he placed out of basically almost a semester of college, which allowed him to take some classes that he would not have otherwise been able to fit into his schedule. And it allowed him to take some classes that it's working toward a certification, and some prototyping classes, which allowed him to get an internship last summer. So those kinds of things are really important. Anything that you have in your hand that you don't know what to do with, maybe you're a super organized person, which is great, but I'm not, and that's why I say a banker's box. Things like awards, certificates, it's great if you have those so that you can scan them in if you want to upload them to an application, for instance. But if you have that one particular spot for everything, you know where to go to look for it. You don't dig down in the bottom of the backpack along with the old chewing gum and the old dirty socks like I had to do. And you'd be surprised how fast some of the stuff online disappears. So ACC syllabi, they go away. I tried to go back and just make a screenshot or take, do a download a syllabus from old classes at ACC. They weren't there. So I had to go back through and dig through all the mess to find it. So ACC particularly, and I know a lot of homeschoolers here take ACC classes. So that is from my own personal experience. So, and this is what happens to ACC syllabi. Okay, so this is what a lot of people want to know about. So you can do high school a lot of ways, but for me, I needed to have a running spreadsheet that I kept because I couldn't remember everything. And if you go 2 years ahead and you think, oh, it'll be easy, they're just a sophomore, and I can remember that in 8th grade they took this film writing class, and that was a really intense class, and I think I can count that for high school. And then if you don't put that down, then by the time you get to junior year, you'll forget it. And the reason I say that is that I started a spreadsheet. It's probably the best advice anybody ever gave me on preparing for high school. Because when my kids started 8th grade, I started a Google spreadsheet, just started dumping things in. Everything they did, even if it was just like a 2-word reminder, 8th grade film class. And when I went back, and like a couple of years later, I went, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that volunteer thing you did. I totally forgot about that, that 2 years that you spent once a week with your friend, writing scripts. And this was a friend whose dad was a script writer. And so they were able to go back. It was an absolutely valid class, but I'd completely forgotten about it because my daughter was playing with a friend. So if you start in 8th or 9th grade and you keep, even if it's just a running list of all the things that your kid did, it will save you so much time. So we'll go into courses in a minute. But these are the kinds of things, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the kinds of things that you would want to put on your spreadsheet. And all this stuff is in that handout that I gave you. So anything your kid does, volunteering, hobbies, extracurriculars, workshops, internships, summer programs, certifications, employment, leadership, travel, sports, and anything else that does not fall into those categories, you can create your own categories. I mean, if you could think of it, put it on there. It all counts. It all counts. So courses in particular, what I did was I set up my courses by subject, and I put in the course title, a description, usually which I just pulled off of the ACC page or whatever page it was that the course was being offered from. So like my daughter took some Russian classes from a woman who tutors out of Chicago, but she has a website. So I just went through and I just copied and pasted that course description. I included the date or the date range, like spring semester of 2014, or so August 2013 to May of 2016, if it was something that we did over a period of years. And that is definitely something that we did a lot of. So, for instance, like if we did, my oldest studied for the geography bee when he's in middle school, which covers a lot of history. So we counted all those years and all that studying of history as a world history class. But it spanned several years. And so I put that in the syllabus and I wrote it up in my course descriptions. I mean, not the syllabus, my spreadsheet. Wrote it up in course descriptions, never had any questions about it. And I had a couple of people, in fact, the person at Rice said, your transcript or your application was the most concise from any homeschooler I've ever seen, which I took as a compliment, I guess. Maybe it wasn't, but I took it that way. And I had actually admissions officers from other schools thank me for making our application complete so that they didn't have to call me with questions. So I included everything I could. And it's perfectly fine for your provider to be you, your provider to be a self-study course. We had a number of those. Not everything has to be outside. Most people will say if you're trying to get into, especially if you're trying to get into a selective college, it's nice to have a couple of outside courses with validation for grades, but not everybody does that. And it's something you can choose to do or not. If you give a grade or a teacher gives a grade, include it. One thing that is important is whether what the level is. Is it a regular high school level class? Is it an honors class? Is it a college class? Those things do matter because weighting grades, when you put your transcript together and you talk about GPA, most people say, well, I don't want to weight grades. Well, that's because we're not ranking students, and that's fine, but scholarships will sometimes knock kids out if they don't have weighted grades because on the surface, their regular unweighted grade point average doesn't look like it matches up to a grade point average from a school that does weight grades because you're in the pool with 98% traditionally school kids. So that's the kind of stuff that I included on my spreadsheet for courses. Yours might look different, but that's what I did. Okay, so the other thing to include, if you're so inclined, is a reading list. We didn't do it. And then one of the colleges that my daughter applied to required it. So she had to go back and recreate 4 years worth of reading. So it's easier to do it as you go. Just the stuff that you would normally think of. Title, author, pub day, ISBN, when you read it, roughly speaking. Did you read it during your, 9th grade year, 10th grade year, whatever. And just a note about what kind of book it is. Did you use it? Was it required for a school, like a class? And those are definitely valid as far as being included on your reading list. Or did you just read it for fun? And younger books like Harry Potter count. Anything like, it doesn't all have to be Moby Dick. It really doesn't. I couldn't get through Moby Dick. Sorry. So it can be anything that your kid reads, because the things that your kid reads for fun tell a lot about that kid's personality. And colleges, I'm taking a course right now on college admissions that talks about applications and how admissions officers look at applications and the kinds of things that they want to see. They get thousands of applications all the time, and what they see are numbers. They see leadership, they see volunteer hours, but they don't get a picture of what a kid is really like. So anytime that you can give a picture of who your kid is, or your kid gives a picture of who they are, because ideally your kids are doing the application, it's good. So a reading list that shows interest in a particular genre or topic or whatever, it's a useful piece of data for them. Okay, your resume. You're going to need that for college interviews. And you just use that spreadsheet that had all that stuff on it. That's to help you create your resume. And you can pull up images online of high school resumes, college resumes. You can make them look however you want. This is different from a transcript. It will basically have your education, your intended major, various things like that, and what kinds of interests you want. But that spreadsheet comes in handy not only for transcript, but also for a resume. And that's something you would create in, when you, at the same time you're doing your transcript. It actually is pretty easy to do at the same time because they cover kind of the same information. All right. Okay, different topic. Letters of recommendation. So if you're applying to selective schools or schools within state schools, colleges within state schools, whether it's a music college or an engineering school or something like that, many of them will require letters of recommendation. And the question I get a lot is, well, as homeschoolers, who do we get our letters of recommendation from? Mom? Well, no, because your mom is your counselor or your parent is your counselor. They're the ones, the parent is the one that writes the counselor letter. You can't have the counselor also write a letter of recommendation. So, in fact, most colleges will have a page, these days they have a page for homeschoolers, and it will say specifically, letters of recommendation from someone other than a family member. Now, this could be a lot of different things, and we'll go through some of that. But basically, you want to establish relationships with people outside your family during your high school years, and then you want to think about who you're going to ask, and you ask respectively, and you provide the information, then you follow up, and we'll go through each of these. Okay, so when you establish relationships with people, you want to have a variety of people. People who, like say you want to go into, I don't know, marine biology. You would want to establish a personal relationship. It doesn't mean go, sailing with them or go, sit Friday night at the coffee shop with them. It just means that they know your name, they know your work, they know your work ethic, they see you in class, they know that you contribute in class. So it doesn't have to be a teacher. It can be someone in your area that can speak to your interest and your ability in that area. So if you're going into engineering, my son used an ACC calculus and a calculus professor and a physics professor. My daughter used her Russian language tutor. Then you also want to have relationships with people who are not in your area of interest, who can speak to who you are as a person. It would be nice to have it as a teacher because they usually want to have letters from 2 different teachers. So this would be somebody who would say, oh, I know that Johnny is going to go into engineering, but he really got into this project on Hamilton and did a great presentation or wrote a great paper, even though it's not his area of interest. And then somebody that's in one of your extracurriculars, whether it's church or sport or like a fine arts teacher or something like that. If you can develop relationships with several people, more than 3 preferably, it will be easy for you to ask them for letters. And teachers especially really like supporting kids who they have a connection with. And most teachers know that part of their job is writing letters, and they don't mind doing it at all. So don't feel like you're putting them out if you're asking them, if you decide to ask them. Okay, so who do you ask? So you don't see your letters. So if you see your letters, it invalidates it. So on the college applications, especially if you use the Common App, which a lot of schools use, not everybody, but state schools don't use the Common App, but a lot of private schools use the Common App. There's a place to check off that says, I waive my right to see my recommendations. Because they say, if the teacher knows that you're going to see this letter, well, then it just means that they're not giving an honest opinion. So, how do you pick a letter writer? Well, it's kind of, sometimes it's obvious, but what if you have somebody for whom English is their second language and is a great teacher, but you're not quite sure they can actually, string words together in a way that makes sense on paper. College admissions officers know that that physics professor that came from China who has broken English, but is a really great guy, knows your kid really well, they know that they're not English majors. They know that they're not going to be able to write particularly well. But you want to try to keep in mind, you just have to keep these things in mind. Not saying discount somebody just because the English is your second language, but just keep everything in mind. Don't ask somebody you are not sure won't give you a positive recommendation, because this happens. This happens where a teacher says, yeah, I'll write you a letter. And I'll be very honest. Or if you do ask somebody and they say, you know, I think there might be a different person that would be better for you, you don't want to push them into writing it, because that's kind of a sign that they don't feel like they can write you a good letter. You need to ask somebody that's known you in the last year or two. You don't want to ask somebody that worked with you in 8th grade or when you were a freshman. Ideally, it would be your junior year and into your senior year. And somebody who not only works with you recently, but knows you well enough to be able to write the letter that you need them to write. I'm not talking about the person that spends Christmas dinner with you. I'm just talking about the person that knows that you show up to class on time every week. You're never late. You share your book with the person who forgets their book. That kind of thing. That can remember you. Okay, how do you ask? It's kind of tricky. So you want to ask nicely, first of all, preferably in person. You want to give them the information they ask for. Okay, so there's a couple things that blew me away when my kids started asking for letters of recommendation. Some people say that it's completely expected to provide a letter of a recommender, and a letter that's already written, or a brag sheet that has all the bullet points of everything you've ever done, so that they can take that, and they can either just take that letter and sign their name at the bottom, or they can take the brag sheet and turn it into their own letter, or they can take the letter and edit it. And having written letters myself, it's extremely helpful to have someone send me a brag sheet, because you have to think, okay, and I have some face blindness too, so if I've met y'all before and I act like I've never met you, that's probably why, because I don't remember your face. So if somebody comes up that I know, but it's like, oh, was it the kid that worked on that project, or was it the kid that worked on the other project? Of course, I can ask them, but it just makes things a lot easier if you send them some information. If they say they don't want it, what I told my kids to do was to, if they said yes, then I would have them send a note that was, thank you for agreeing to write this letter. If you recall, in your calculus class in spring of 2013, I made an A in your class, and I did this, and I was the one that stuck around and talked about blah, 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 just kind of a reminder about who that kid, what happened in their relationship and what kind of things went on that were unique to my kid. And almost everything's done online now. So what'll happen is, if you work, we can go into this if y'all want to know more, I can tell you more, but basically the way it works is the student will assign a recommender online in their college application, like their account, and then the request goes to that email address. The letter writer writes the letter, and they send it, they either upload it to I usually upload it directly to the application, which can cause, there can be glitches. We had one college that could, actually, with both my kids, we had one recommender for each of them that we had serious trouble getting, and they ended up just emailing directly to the admissions office. So some people still want to write paper letters. That is fine, but you can't see them. And so what that means is they have to either send them directly to the college, which means that it's out of your hands, you don't know if it ever actually gets there, or they can give you a stack of them, 10 copies or whatever, in an envelope with their signature sealed over, written over the sealed flap. And that way when the college gets them, they know that you have not seen the letter that's inside. And you want to get as many of them as you think you'll need for colleges, the number of colleges that you want to apply to. It's happening less and less often, but some people, especially older professors, they still want to write on paper. And that's fine. And some schools still have paper applications, believe it or not. And the other thing that we tend to forget is because there are a bunch of different kinds of college applications, it can be very confusing for the recommender on how to submit their letters. And so you want to actually give them the instructions multiple times. You want to, when you first get their approval of their acceptance to write a letter, you send them a thank you note. Thanks for agreeing. Here's how you'll do it. I'll send you an invitation through the college app and for the Common App, and expect to see that sometime in a couple of weeks. And then when you're checking up, if they haven't submitted it, then you tell them again, and then you tell them again 2 weeks before when you're starting to panic, and then you call them or you meet them or they call you, and then you say, well, here's what you do, because they're the first 3 times they didn't get it. So it does take sometimes some repetition on how to upload, because a lot of the college applications work in different ways, and if they're doing letters for different kids, it can get confusing. Okay, so once they've agreed, follow up. You want to give your recommender plenty of time. If you're applying to college in the fall, ask your recommender at the end of the school year, in May or at the beginning of the semester. And you tell them, oh, I need that letter by August 1st. Because the state schools, the state applications, the Apply Texas, especially if you're applying to Texas schools, application opens August 1st. And the earlier you get your application in, if you're applying to Texas schools, the better, because most of them have rolling admission. And the way scholarships work, we could talk about scholarships if y'all want to, but that's another whole workshop. But for schools that have rolling admission, they start giving out their scholarships as they start accepting students. So if you wait a long time, a lot of that money is gone. So, and I'm talking about merit scholarships, not need-based aid. So you want, especially if you're applying to Texas schools, your deadline's going to be August 1st, because you want to get your application in as soon after August 1st as possible. Now what that means is, if you ask them at the end of May or beginning of June, you need to ping them again. They're in the summer, they're in Belize, you know? So you need to give them contact them again. And you can actually see your application online, and you can see the little checks about things that have come in. So if you don't have that check mark next to your letter recommender, your recommender's name, you got to start pinging them. So a month before the deadline, and then 2 weeks. And I always suggest having a soft deadline. Tell them that you need it 2 weeks before you actually need it, because like I said before, those glitches. We had a glitch with both of my kids, with a recommender for each of my kids. And it took a while. So just don't wait till the last minute and give yourself a cushion. Okay, totally different topic. College interviews. Now, not all colleges will ask for interviews. If you're applying to highly selective colleges, almost all of them will. And they are, for homeschoolers, not optional. They'll say they're optional, they're not optional. They want to know if you can string 2 sentences together, if you can interact with other people, if you can, order a coffee on your own, it's you laugh, but it's true. And actually for selective schools, it's really, if you really want to get into, unless your last name is Gates, or you have a building named after you on campus, everything you do for a school that has a low acceptance rate, and I'm talking about anything like under 30%, you want to have every little piece of data that connects you to them as possible. So anything that's optional is not optional. I don't care what they say. Optional is not optional. So interviews being one of them. So interviews are really important. And there's still that question for a lot of people, even though there are so many of us, and we know statistically that homeschoolers do much better in college, and they have better graduation rates, and they have better GPAs, and as compared to traditional students. But there's still some stigma. Now, part of that is because many of the college interviews are done by alumni, and many of them have been out of school for a long time, and they have no experience with homeschoolers, so they don't know what to expect. So we'll go through what to do before interviews. Okay. So you want to look up common interview questions, and you want to be prepared. And one of the biggest ones is, why homeschooling? Or what are the advantages that you had with homeschooling? Or what did you like about homeschooling? What did you not like about homeschooling? There's almost always going to be a homeschooling question on there once they know. Now, one piece of advice that I'll give you is, whatever you do, do not say, because traditional school sucks. Don't do that, because almost all those people came from traditional schools. So you don't want to say, well, I'm better than you because the kind of school that you went to is horrible. What you want to do is say the good things about homeschooling, the things that you like, the opportunities that have awarded, that's homeschooling has awarded you. And really with most colleges, they want to know, how did you take advantage of the freedom that you had? I know we are all busy, right? We all drive a million places. We feel like we have no time, but we still do have choices that a lot of students don't have when they're going to traditional school. So of those choices, why did you pick the choices that you did? What did you like about that? What didn't you like about that? Practice with mock interviews. So reach out to the people that you know. Find out who has ever given interviews for a college, for a job, for anything else. Get them to sit down with your kid and give them pointers. My son did, and you definitely want to do this before your first real interview. My son did 2 interviews with 2 different people, and I gave them great tips. Don't fiddle with your hands so much. Sit up straight. Don't make that weird noise you made. I don't know what it was, but they will ask them for very clear, very defined, very honest tips, because there are things that we all do. We have little habitual things that we all do that come across as distracting when you have an interview. Put together your resume and have a copy. They will probably not ask for it, but have it. Have questions to ask. They want to know. You don't want to sit there like a lump. They want to know that you are interested in the school, and also that you know something about the school. So, yeah, I'm here because my parents told me I need to apply to Rice. I don't want to go to Rice. I want to get out of state, but they told me that I have to be here, so here I am. That's not good. So come up with questions, and if you don't want to be there, don't go. That's a whole nother topic about fit, but that's another workshop. Find out who your interviewer is, if possible. Look them up on LinkedIn, look them up online. Find out what their major was, when they graduated, where they're from. See if you can establish a connection with them. Find out, be informed about the college. Why are you applying there? If there's a particular department that you really want to get into, maybe it's a genetics department, maybe it's a music department. Find out something about that department that makes them know that you actually know something about their college. Because I can tell you that a lot of students that are interviewing haven't taken the time. You want to be the kid that takes the time to make their time worthwhile. Try to make a personal connection if you can. If you, like one interviewer that interviewed my daughter was from a town very close to the one that I grew up in. So they knew about all the different, they were able to talk about the different towns. And this was a college in Colorado. Shouldn't get in, but whatever. It's probably, they had a great interview, but shouldn't get in. So this is a big one for a lot of homeschoolers. Have one solid interview outfit. So it means if you're, it doesn't have to be fancy, clean, neat, not wrinkles, not stained, no holes, shoes. You laugh. I've seen it all. So, not something like that. You do want to have very neat, tidy clothes. It can be Target. It can be something from Goodwill. It just needs to be plain and unwrinkled and together. let's see, what else? Okay, get their business card, always get their business card, and send them an email thanking them afterward. Be on time no matter what. There's no excuse for you to not be on time unless you die in an accident on the way there. You give yourself the amount of time that allows you to be there 30 minutes before, because we all know how Austin traffic is. And a lot of these interview sessions, they go like this. They have somebody scheduled every 10 to 15 minutes, and they'll sit in a hotel room, not a hotel room, but like a bar or a conference room, and they have someone coming in at 6 o'clock and somebody coming in at 6:15, and somebody coming in at 6:30. And if you are late, you have, well, decreased your time, and you've made a really bad first impression. And if they actually give you your time, then you've made it bad for the next person in line. So be on time. Be there 30 minutes ahead of time, no matter what. During the interview, shake hands, practice. Believe it or not, practice. If you're a kid and you've never had much experience shaking hands, practice. Practice more than once or twice. Have your resume. Like I said, they probably want to ask for it, but have it. Ask for a business card and thank them. You'd be surprised how many people don't thank interviewers and admissions officers. I hear it. Yeah, you know, it's the rare kid who actually thanks me for taking the time to interview me, or to interview them, because they're taking their time out. And almost all of these people, well, not almost all, many of them are alums that are doing it because they love their school. They're not getting paid. You know, they're doing it after they get off work, after a long day, and you know, they don't have to do that. So you really want to thank them. Afterward, write a paper thank you note that actually goes in the mail. Paper. My kids fought me about this. My oldest kid still fights me about this. Paper thank you note is becoming rarer and rarer, and it's rare enough that now interviewers notice it and they make notes in your file, or they stick that thank you note into your file. They don't necessarily do that with an email thank you. So a paper note doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be long. It can be 2 or 3 sentences. Thank you for your time today. Enjoyed learning more about X college, and I appreciate, you know, whatever. 3 sentences. And keep a box of blank thank you notes in the car, so that when you meet somebody that spends time, or if you have an interview, you can sit in the car after the interview, write it out, you have the business card in your hand, address it, and when you get home, put it in the mail. You don't want to wait more than 2 days to send out a thank you note. And one of the reasons we're doing it as soon as you get back in the car is that I can guarantee you that that card is going to get lost, that business card. It will get lost. I can't tell you how many business cards just disappear from the time they enter my son's hand until the time he gets back to his dorm room, for instance. Must have fallen out of my pocket. Really? Your earbuds never fall out of your pocket. Your business card wasn't. Okay, so this is just a wrap up on how some things that you have to learn as a student how to do. I need to learn how to make a phone call. Be surprised. How to make a phone call that is let's face it, I'm a little phone phobic. I get it. I understand people don't want to make phone calls, and people these days are not making as many phone calls. So the students don't have the practice anymore that we used to have when I grew up a million years ago. So, you know, have practice. Even if it's calling the pizza place to have to put in an order for pizza. Practice making phone calls, because you will need that skill as a student when you have questions of a college, and when you have to call a college and talk to an admissions officer on the phone. It's intimidating. You want to have a lot of experience with how to make a reasonable phone call where you don't sound like you're shaking in your boots. And how to write professional emails. Okay, so professional sounding. So, you know, just the basic things that all of us parents know. You know, when you're trying to sound professional, you don't use a lot of contractions. You don't necessarily call somebody by their first name the first time. I mean, there's a little bit of formality in how you write a professional email. You have to learn that. And you learn that by talking to people who've done it and writing it. And I just made my kids write their own, and then I would look it over before they sent it. But it's really important to learn how to do that, because once they get to college, you're not there, right? Checking over their shoulder and writing it for them. And they're going to have to email their professors. And you don't want to sound like an adult. Network. You need to learn how to network. Networking means feeling comfortable going up to a stranger at a coffee and saying, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm a senior and I'm applying to your college," or "I'm a freshman in mechanical engineering and I saw that talk that you gave the other day and I really enjoyed it." You need to learn how to go up to strangers and make small talk, at least to break the ice. You also need to know how to use LinkedIn, believe it or not. That's something that high schoolers are using now, and certainly once you're a freshman in college, everybody's gonna want you to have a LinkedIn page, because that's how people can find each other for internships or jobs. It's important. Learn how to make small talk, talked about that. Break that. You ever talk with a famous person? Okay, that's an interesting one, because there's some times that you will be at a talk and you might have that opportunity to go up after the talk, shake somebody's hand and say, "I really enjoyed that talk that you gave on quantum mechanics." And maybe this is somebody that's a Nobel Prize winner. You never know. And you can, if you're a kid that really enjoys the topic and it's somebody they really wanted to see, it's very intimidating. So it's important to learn how to do that kind of thing. Again, writing thank you notes is it's very important, more so than almost anybody thinks, believe it or not, from what I hear from the people on the college admission side. And it's becoming rarer and rarer. And once you get a formula, it's easy. You just have to know the formula. Again, create a resume and dress. So those are the basic things on how to do, things to learn to do. Okay, so basically, when it's all said and done, being an adult for purposes of high school and college applications, you need to learn how to be independent. You need to be able to step up. You need to be able to keep track of your own stuff, make your own appointments, and you need to step out and be proactive instead of waiting for things to fall in your lap. So if you can master any of that stuff, you will be a step ahead of many of the other kids going into college who don't know how to set up a dentist appointment, who don't know how to keep their own calendar, because most kids, face it, most kids in traditional school are told every single day, all day long, where they need to be, what time they need to be there, how long they're going to be there, when they're going to eat lunch, when they get to go to the bathroom. You have an advantage because you haven't been doing that all those years. So you will have that advantage, but you also need to make sure that you basically can manage things on your own with the help of a daily text from your parent.
What were some things that you did along the way to kind of, like you said, by the time your oldest was doing it, you were really wanting him to be the one doing all these things and less you. So were there any specific things you did along the way to kind of build toward that transition?
So
do a lot of it?
What did I do along the way to build toward making them both independent?
Yeah, so it wasn't just senior and senior.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
So it wasn't just throwing into the deep end as senior,
Oh.
like how you do it.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the personality of your kid. So my first kid was my second kid. Was very independent. She did all of the application stuff herself. She was researching school. She was making her list. She was cutting it down and adding schools, and she was doing this, a year ahead of time. And my oldest kid was a lot harder to get to do anything that was independent like that, because it was all unfamiliar, and he had a harder time with things that were unfamiliar. My daughter was more, she was ready, she felt like she was ready to be on her own a lot earlier than she really was ready to be on her own. But she was the one that spent 2 different summers in high school overseas by herself. But my oldest kid, he didn't want to go out of the house. So, every kid's different. So anytime I had the opportunity for them to do something on their own, I either let them and sometimes force them to do it. So some things didn't get done because they chose not to spend the time to do it. And anything that was necessary, I made sure it got done. But if it was something they kind of wanted to do but weren't willing to put the effort out, then they just suffered from not getting the advantage of doing that themselves. So it's like, well, if you really wanted to go, with your friend to do something else and we needed to call to make reservations for that and you weren't willing to do it, then, so it does depend on the personality of your kid. But every opportunity that I had to let them do something for themselves, I did, from little things to big things. So now that meant that I did a lot more helping my oldest with his applications. I was fine with filling out the demographic stuff that, addresses and, the family history and all that kind of stuff, because that didn't take any brain work, that was just filling in. But, he had to do all the essays and stuff like that, so obviously. And then we sat side by side with my daughter. She just did it on her own. With him, I just had to sit side by side with him and say, okay, now, put that in there, and what do you think about that? All that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
My 8th grade son he's kind of a theme through his life. He'll hear of a job, and he'll say, I didn't know that job existed. What do you have to do to get that job? Or do you think that would be a good job for me? Do you think I'd like it? So when we were in public school, they gave us the strong interest inventory, and we all came up as potential bus drivers or whatever.
Yeah.
So I looked online to see if I could give that to him, and it's really difficult, and I'm kind of thinking it on that. Is there an interest inventory or where's your Venn diagram between what you're good at, what you love, and what would work? Is there anything you know of?
I don't know. My son, his freshman year, took strong interest inventory at Rice, and that was through that leadership certification program that he wouldn't have otherwise been able to do because he stopped in math classes. So they did the strong inventory. I have heard of other places or other inventories that you can do. I haven't looked into them because both of my kids pretty much knew what they wanted to do. So, but I've seen discussions of it, and if any of y'all want to get on a national homeschooling high school list, you probably are. A lot of you are already on it. It's called the best one that I've seen. It's a Yahoo group. It's an old Yahoo group. It's been around forever. But the wealth of knowledge on there is extraordinary, and it's called Homeschooled to College is the group name, but it's HS2, the number 2, COLL. There is also one that's all spelled out, Homeschool to College, but that's not the one you want. The one that the HS2 call is the break off from the original one, which was Homeschool to College. Long story, but anyway. But there are people on that list. The ones who post the most are the ones that have the brainiacs who are mostly in STEM, but there's a lot of knowledge about lots of stuff. And I think there was a discussion on there last year about interest inventories. So, yeah.
That would come to a clarification question. You said that you had the banker's box with all the physical papers and things. Did you find that you had to, did they ask for those things very often?
Sometimes. If you're applying, if you're petitioning to get credit for a class, they're going to want a syllabus. They're going to want the resources that were used, and they're going to want some sort of sample, like a test or paper or something like that. And all of those things were in my banker's box. When my daughter went to college, she had, with this program that she did over the summer, she got at the end of the program, she took a test, like a certification test for her level in Russian, and she got a certificate for it. And so that was in the banker's box that I could pull out. It is surprising how often you won't need it very often, but when you need it, you need it. You know, so like there was there were a couple of schools that my daughter applied to that wanted to see writing samples. So we went back and pulled out an essay that she had written and sent it. So all of those things, they might only need one or two things, but if you don't have it, then you're kind of screwed. So.
This was in cases where you were trying to sort of like clip out of the class or get credit for class that would count as college credit.
Well, there were a couple of colleges that my daughter applied to that was part of the application. So there were a couple of colleges that my kids were considering going to that they could have petitioned for courses that we ended up not doing, but I had all that information that they would have asked for. So, and the Russian certification thing was to be in place of however many classes of Russian that I don't know. It's some certification terminology that it tells you how fluent they are, and so they will you can place out of Russian 1, 2, 3 or whatever. So and they might some schools will take, like the state schools will almost all have some sort of a sister relationship with ACC. So a lot of those classes that you take at ACC will count for UT credit. Not all of them, but some will. So it actually is a great idea if you want to get Texas government out of the way. If you have to have it to graduate from UT Dallas, for instance, you can do it at ACC and have it count as your high school on your high school transcript, but also count as a college credit, because if you're in the district and it's part of dual credit, then it's free for you, and you don't have to have that extra class during the school year when you're at UT Dallas, all that kind of stuff, or wherever you are. Yeah.
And forgive me, because I know it goes around the AAH list all the time, but what's the minimum age for ACC?
They just changed it this year, so it's now if you consider yourself to be a freshman.
Oh.
Yeah, it used to be a junior, but now it's freshman. You still get 12 free classes, and that's classes, not course credits. So generally speaking, a CC class, one semester, counts as 1 year of high school. I counted all of my kids' community college classes, their one semester classes, as 1 year of high school. So, for instance, my daughter was able to take 11 documented high school years worth of language by doing it through ACC. And she's got college credit for that, and we've got grades for that, and all that kind of stuff. And that was, that had those grades that justified the other stuff that I put on her transcript. So I say justified, and you don't have to have outside grades, but for us it made sense. So.
You did mention earlier including some 8th grade whatever in your spreadsheet. What are some of the things?
So people ask all the time what's considered high school work. Or can you include work that was done in middle school? So the way I did it, and different people have different opinions, but the way I did it, and it worked fine for us, nobody raised any eyebrows, was if they were doing high school level work in middle school, we included it as high school. Now, we did our transcript by subject as opposed to by year, and so it made sense. So, we did it by math and English and social sciences and foreign language and all that kind of stuff. So anything that they did, they did a couple of things in 8th grade that we were able to, like that film class I was talking, the script writing class, she did that over a couple of years, and started in 8th grade, I guess, and she did it with a friend. And so that even though it started in 8th grade, and because it went for a long time and she learned a lot, I included that. So, but yeah, I think there are a lot of different ways to think about what constitutes a high school level class, especially if you're doing it on your own and not with, like if you're doing it self-study, for instance. But I mean, there are a lot of different ways to decide whether you consider that to be high school level or not. But I figured if it was high school level, it was high school level. It didn't matter to me how old my kids were. And nobody raised. I had the dates on there. I mean, on my transcript, I put the dates that they studied certain things, and so it wasn't like I was trying to hide it. I mean, I had it by subject, but then there was one column in my transcript that had the dates that my classes went. So I wasn't trying to hide it, and I think they kind of expect that from homeschoolers. Not necessarily going to be have the same chronological sequence of things that most typical, traditional schoolers have. Yeah.
Can I ask that?
Yeah.
Okay. So you said that with the first two, they just knew what they wanted to do.
Yeah. Of course, that
But
might change.
yeah, I mean, how common is that? How did they get to that point where they knew? Did they just kind of wake up one day and they just knew what they wanted to do? Did they take different kinds of classes along the way that pointed them in that direction?
Well, I'll preface that by saying that my third kid has no idea. Zero idea. Yeah, I want to go to college, I think. So it's not because I'm some brilliant parent. It's just because that's who my kids were. My oldest kid, from the time he was 3, loved combat robots, and we'd get up in the middle of the night and record Robot Wars from the UK because it was on at 3 in the morning, and set the VCR. And so his 4th birthday cake had a picture of one of the combat robots on it. Still loves it today. He's actually started a group at Rice to develop combat robots, and so he knew from the beginning that he was probably going to go into mechanical engineering, but that's his personality. I have my idea, and I don't want to be. Don't confuse me with any additional information. So that's just his personality, My daughter just sort of. I'm not really sure how it came about with her. She actually had a year at the international. So what was it called? It's called Lycée Français, and it was the turned into the international school. So she did Spanish and French and English for 1 year when she was like 4, and she kind of had a knack for languages. And so when we didn't really do any languages until she, I guess it was when she started ACC. She started as a sophomore, and she took Spanish and loved it, and then went to Peru and learned more Spanish there, and then she came back, and she decided she also wanted to learn Russian because the State Department offers this thing, and it's all for languages of interest to the State Department, and the one that was the least scary was Russian. So that's the one that she took because, if you get into this program and they send you overseas, then, you might go to places like Morocco and, places that as a woman by herself, a girl by herself, were very scary to me as her mother. So Russian seemed like the least scary, and so she took that, really loved it. And she found herself in high school also with friends creating languages and coming up with like written alphabets and cultures and these societies. She tried to learn Klingon. She learned the whole alphabet for Vulcan and various Star Trek languages. And so she would write them in ink on her arm, and she would write these letters, and it was kind of crazy. But she just kind of fell into that, and so she decided that she wanted to go. That after Peru, she spent the next summer in Estonia with the State Department through that program, and learned Russian and spoke Russian there. She already had a couple of years of Russian, but she learned more Russian there. And so when she came back, she had she didn't go anywhere the summer before her senior year, but then she decided that she wanted someone to pay her to learn languages and travel. So her idea was to get a degree in learning languages and traveling. So the best idea was, at the moment, she's in international relations, I think, but she saw a talk by the guy that created Dothraki for Game of Thrones, and she texted me. She's like, "Oh my God, you won't believe who I'm listening to. I'm in the same room as David Peterson," or whatever his name was. I was like, "Who's that?" It's like, "Oh, he created Dothraki for Game of Thrones." So, she's going to take some linguistics classes. But it's funny because she just always liked languages. I don't know. But for my third kid, I don't know. I think if he can find a job that allows him to sit in his room and watch video, like YouTube videos, that's what he's going to go into. Funny cat videos. He's like, "Mom, look." I have work to do. Yeah.
Kind of a corollary to that, and I hear chatter in the college entrance world that there's a shift from the generalist, somebody who's kind of done it all. I've been the debate captain, and I've been to more somebody who has one passion and has followed that thematically through their life. That colleges are seeking that more. Somebody kind of knows who they are.
It depends on the college.
Okay.
So if your kid wants to go to MIT, they're going to want a kid who has very strong math skills and has the numbers to back them up, who has shown some long-term interest in a math, science, technology, something, computer science, something. And these are just, I'm just pulling this out of the air, of course, but they are going to want a kid who goes deep. Because they have the pick of basically the world to choose from. Their acceptance rate is like 6% or something. So a lot of liberal arts schools are not as interested in necessarily going that deep. They want kids who are... So most schools will want kids who fulfill what their goals are. So my daughter is at the school, very low acceptance rate, but she didn't get into other schools that had equally or higher acceptance rate necessarily. She got into some, but the ones that were also super selective, she didn't get into any of those. But the school that she got into, which was her first choice, was because they have 5 goals. I don't remember what they are, but she, because of her interests, had filled every one of those goals without realizing it. So she had a lot of volunteer work, she had intercultural studies, she had interdisciplinary work. And so my advice to people is, don't worry about the name of the school. Focus on what makes your kid sing. What is it that really makes your kid thrive? And work toward making your kid be the best kid that can be, whether it's a kid that likes to go deep or one that likes to learn a lot. And then find a school that best matches your kid's interests. Because if you try to fit the kid to the school and it's not a good match, they're not going to be happy there. Neither one is going to be happy. Even if they were to get in, they wouldn't be happy. So really there are other people who have different opinions, but I don't like having the kid do what it takes to get into X school, because that to me is frankly stupid. You don't know if that school's going to be a good fit. Have your kid be the best kid they can be, and then find the school that meets them. So the answer to your question is, it depends on what school you're looking at. Mm-hmm. They all want to see a kid who is engaged, who will give back to the community, who has shown that they can invest time. So if you think about it sort of, critically, the students they're their paying customers. So they want a kid that's going to pay all 4 years. And if they don't have financial aid, that's even better, right? So they're going to pay the bucks to get into the school. But they don't want that kid to flame out. They want that kid to go through those years and graduate. So, so they usually will like kids who have shown an interest in something that lasts more than a year. So if you do synchronized swimming and you've done it for 3 years, that's great. If you do 2 or 3 things for 3 years, that's terrific. If you do 6 things and do them for 6 months or a year, that's not so terrific. Because that means that the kid's going to be like, yeah, well, that was cool for a month. I'm going to go do something else now. And they don't think necessarily that kid has the pattern that shows that they're going to graduate. And they want kids to graduate because that looks good for their school, because parents look for those graduation rates when they're applying to colleges. Because I don't want my kid going to a college that has a 30% graduation rate, because they're more than likely not going to graduate. And they want kids who will stay there the whole time. So, does that answer your question? Yeah.
Is there a minimum number of schools to apply to? Like, I have a son that's like set on UT Business School, and that's the school he's going to apply to, and I keep trying to explain, there are others to apply to. I've heard you talk before about like REAP schools.
Yeah, right.
Safety schools, is that
So,
like,
UT Business School is really hard to get in.
oh, I know. We've met for years. He's a sophomore, and I keep telling him, okay.
Yeah, it's great if he gets in.
Right.
But you can say, yeah, you can apply to that one school, but if you don't get in, you're going to be taking a gap. You're going to be working at P. Terry's. So you probably want to have some other schools and that's where we get into the workshop on reach and fit and match and all those other schools, because generally speaking, people tend to say that about 8 schools is the right number. So you want two safety schools, which are schools based on the statistics that they give out. Your kid has a really good chance of getting in. 2 match schools, which means that your kid matches the middle 50% of students that they admit, which is usually based on things like test scores, if you do test scores. And then 2 reach schools, which means that the students who get in have better test scores and better some things, but you might have this other X factor that might make you a more attractive candidate. And then a couple of other schools just for grins.
Okay, that's fine.
So, that would be one of his reach, because the UT Business School is a reach for everybody.
Right.
And when I talk about reach, any of the top tier schools, I don't care if you have perfect SAT scores, perfect ACT scores, and you've done 10 AP scores with 5s on all of them, they're still reaches. They're reaches for everybody. And so, like, Gentry applied to MIT. So he was, that's my oldest kid. He applied early. He was deferred to regular admission. 70% of the kids who applied, I think something like 10% were accepted, 70% went to regular admission, 20% were rejected. That means that 70% were qualified to go. And they had to take those thousands of applications and decide which kids to pull that would make the best freshman class. And it could have been any of those 70%. So you don't want 10 jugglers. You might want 1 juggler. And, you don't want 10 bagpipe players. You might only want 1 bagpipe player. Maybe you want no bagpipe player. They have to kind of figure out which kids are going to make the best freshman class. But, so I don't even remember what the question was now. But, reach schools, the number of applicants that they get is overwhelming, and the vast majority of them could be successful there. And so, like, Stanford is now below 5% acceptance rate. Duke, my daughter applied to Duke, and she's a legacy. My father-in-law taught biomechanical engineering there. Didn't get in. They said that of their 1,700 slots for their she applied. So there's a difference between, for those of you who don't know, there's a difference between if you apply early, You can apply regular decision or early decision or early action, depending on what a school allows you to apply. Duke offers early decision, which means that if you get in, you definitely commit to going. So of those 1,700 open spots for freshmen, 900 of them went to early decision applicants, which meant that 800 of them were for regular decision applicants. So you already are at a disadvantage. And so she didn't get in. And she's a legacy. So, I mean, her grandfather taught there for decades. Yeah, that's just the way it goes. I mean, it's probably other things, but, you know, she did the interview. So, she did get that one.
I'll echo that.
Yeah.
To tell your kids that it is a crapshoot, and that's very comforting.
Lots of people call them lottery schools.
Right?
Yeah. Well, now these are schools that most people are not going to apply to, and most people are not going to get into, because most kids don't want to go to those high stress, high intensity schools. I mean, most kids would not be a good fit for Ivy. My daughter and my third kid would not have been a good fit for an Ivy. They're not that kind of kid. And I tend to sort of think that most people want their kids to apply to really selective schools, but most don't, and most shouldn't, because there's a better fit for them elsewhere. Because the really selective schools have a culture of being really selective because the kids are super, super dedicated and driven, and that comes with its own set of problems. Like my son at Rice, it's a long story that I won't bore you with, but they are struggling with the problem of all these kids who were so driven in high school and, you know, captain of the soccer team and the chess team leader and president of the class and all this kind of stuff. They get there and they think they have to do all the same stuff, all this high, you know, it's like being in every club, and also taking 21 hours, and then they can't do it. And then they're in, you know, their hair's falling out, and they're in the counselor's office because they can't handle it. Well, of course they can't handle it. You know, and the school's trying to tell them that, you know, this isn't high school. You don't have to do all those things. You know, take 15 hours. So, yeah. And so not every kid, in fact, most kids are not a match for a highly selective school, and no one should worry about that. It's okay. It's fine.
There's a great TED Talk on where they analyze the salaries of the Ivies 10 years out versus and it's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
And they've also found that, I could go on for this forever and I won't bore you, but they found that the kids who are driven and would have been good candidates for an Ivy, if they go to a different school, are just as successful. Because it's not the school, it's the kids. So, what other questions?